This started like any simple trip home, but it ended with me realizing I'd stepped straight into someone else's nightmare. It was spring break. I was visiting my parents in a small town, one of those quiet places where the streets go dark at night, where shadows swallow the sidewalks. Cheap Airbnbs made sense, so I booked one. I thought nothing of it. Just a few nights, just a quiet trip. The moment I arrived, though, everything felt wrong. I pulled into the neighborhood late at night. The world felt dead. No street lamps, no people, just endless black. Every house sat silent and lifeless, except one, my Airbnb. Its windows glowed faintly against rows of unlit homes, like a single candle burning in a graveyard. I told myself it was nothing. Small town, early nights. I carried my bags inside, unpacked, ate some snacks, and turned on a movie to relax after the long drive. Everything felt fine, until the knocking started. At first, it was gentle. 3 soft taps against the door. I froze, paused the movie, checked my phone for a message from the host. Nothing. But the knocking didn't stop. When I finally opened the door, a man stood there. Mid-30s, black winter hat, battered red flannel. He looked misplaced, like someone who'd been dropped on the wrong doorstep. He gave a weak smile, mumbled something I couldn't catch, and turned to walk away. I locked the door and tried to shrug it off. Maybe the wrong house, maybe drunk. But if that were true, why did he come back? The next day, I left early to visit my parents. Everything seemed normal, until I returned that evening, too tired to do much except watch TV. And then, right on cue, around 9, came the knocking again. This time I checked the peephole first. Same man, same hat, same flannel. I cracked the door open and asked if he needed something. He stared at me with empty eyes and simply said, "No," then turned and disappeared into the dark. It wasn't an accident anymore. It wasn't a mistake. Someone was coming back for something. That night, I left the bedroom door cracked just enough to hear better. I didn't like the thought of sleeping with the house sealed up like a coffin. Sometime deep in the night, I woke up. Pitch black. No sound but my own breathing. And then I heard it. Soft whispers outside. My skin went cold.
The whispers broke into pounding. A violent, hammering knock shook the front door. I crept down the hall and peered through a window. The man in the flannel was back, but he wasn't alone. More figures shifted in the dark, hiding, waiting. I turned to retreat and froze in terror. Another man stared straight at me through the back window. And then came the footsteps. Not 1 or 2, but many, racing around the house. I ran, locked myself in the bedroom, dialed the police. As I waited, the house was surrounded. Hands jiggled doorknobs, fists slammed against glass. Heavy boots pounded the deck. They weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to get in. I pressed my back against the wall, heart racing so loud I worried they could hear it. On the line, the dispatcher promised officers were close. The noises swelled around me, windows rattling, wood splintering. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. From the distance came the rise of sirens. The moment those sirens echoed through the streets, the footsteps scattered, the voices vanished, the men dissolved into the night. Police searched the property, but found no one. I explained everything, but when they contacted the host, his reaction chilled me almost as much as the men outside. He wasn't concerned, he wasn't apologetic, he was annoyed. as if the entire ordeal was just an inconvenience. The investigation turned up nothing. No suspects, no answers. But over the years, I pieced together a theory. Someone else had stayed in that Airbnb before me, someone connected to the men who came knocking. Maybe they owed a debt. Maybe they'd betrayed someone. Maybe worse. Whoever they were looking for, it wasn't me. And when I answered the door, their confusion turned into something darker, something that almost pulled me into their world. I left the house the very next morning, never returned. The listing was pulled down not long after, and I never heard from the host again. But here's what unsettles me most. The man in the flannel, the one who knocked politely, who looked surprised to see me, he never tried to force his way in. He was just the one making contact. The others were the ones trying to break inside. He looked confused when he saw me, not because he was at the wrong house, but because the person he expected wasn't behind that door. And that means the people in the dark weren't after me at all. I had simply stepped into someone else's nightmare.
I've lived in the same house for 8 years. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, nothing special. When I had roommates, the extra space made sense. But when they moved out, half the house went silent. 2 rooms became my world, my bedroom and the game room. The other 2, they were just dead space. One filled with dusty storage boxes, the other completely empty. Just 4 walls, a thin layer of dust on the baseboards, and an echo of footsteps that never should have been there. It was a regular weekday night. I'd just gotten home from a late shift, grabbed Wendy's on the way, and collapsed into my chair in the game room. Headphones on, controller in hand, Call of Duty queued up. Perfect plan. Game all night. The house hummed the way empty rooms hum. Low, patient, almost watchful. And before my first match even loaded, I heard it. A sound. A knock, maybe? Or the soft thud of a door closing somewhere upstairs. I ripped my headset off and listened. My heart hammered as I waited for it to repeat. But nothing came. Just silence. I told myself it was nothing. The house settling, maybe a neighbor's door. Shrugged it off and dove into the game. But something about that silence felt heavier than usual. Like the walls themselves were waiting. 2 hours slipped away in a blur of cheap pizza and kill streaks. And then it came again. The sound. Too quiet to come from my headset. Too deliberate to be the house. A knock? A door closing? Or someone shifting boxes around? I froze, then got up and cracked open my bedroom door. The hallway stretched out, dimly lit by the glow from the stairwell. Nothing moved. After a minute of staring, I went downstairs to check the front door. It was locked, porch laid off, street outside silent. I made sure the deadbolt was secure before heading back upstairs. This time I left my door open just a little, just enough to hear if the sound came again. Headphones back on, I launched another round. 20 minutes later, as the match ended and I leaned back to sip my soda, it happened. Something rushed past the open doorway. A blur, a shadow moving faster than a person should. I tore the headset off and jumped to my feet. My pulse roared in my ears. For minutes, I just stood there frozen, staring at the hallway. It felt like if I blinked, something would be waiting. Finally, I forced myself to move. I checked every room, the storage room, the empty room, the bathroom. Nothing. The house was silent, empty, until I reached the front door and saw it. The deadbolt, the one I had locked myself, was unlocked.
It was a tiny detail, but it fractured the story I'd been telling myself, that this was nothing, that I was tired, that it was all in my head. If it wasn't me, then who? That's when I called the police. The officers moved like men trained to swallow fear and spit out procedure. Their flashlights cut across the dark corners of my house, closets, under beds, behind couches. Then one of them stopped at the empty room at the end of the hall. He opened the door, swept his beam across the bare floor, and saw it. A tattered blanket shoved under the bed frame, a thin mattress folded against the wall, empty soda cans crammed into a shoebox. Evidence. Small, human-sized evidence. Someone had been living in that room, sleeping there, eating there. For how long, nobody knew. The officer's voice was low when he told me what they suspected. Someone had been hiding there, possibly for weeks, maybe months, right on the other side of the wall where I'd been gaming, living, sleeping. The thought tore through me. I imagined someone pressing their ear to the plaster, listening to my every move, learning my schedule by the rhythm of my footsteps, waiting for the exact second I slipped on my headphones. What if, that night, I'd stepped into the hallway and met them face to face? What if I had asked who they were and they answered? The police told me there was a high chance they'd been there long term, which meant they knew everything, my noises, my habits, my silence. They could have been inches away from me night after night, and I never noticed. And the scariest part? The police didn't catch them. I moved out the next morning, not because I was told to, because I couldn't stand the idea of walking past that room again. I packed in a rush, every clink of a box hitting the floor sounding like a countdown. The police logged the incident, but there were no fingerprints, no suspect, no trail. The empty room stayed empty after I left, but in my head, it wasn't. It was full of the memory of that shadow darting across my doorway, full of the presence of someone who knew me too well, someone who had been closer than I ever realized. That night, I slept in a different bed, in a different place, but every creak, every settling sound felt like someone else's footstep. And in the morning, when I opened my suitcase, I saw something I didn't pack. A single, tattered soda can, the same brand the police had found in that shoebox. That's when I understood. It wasn't just my house they'd been inside. They'd been close enough to touch my things, close enough to follow me, close enough to leave me a message. The scariest part isn't that someone was in my house. The scariest part is how close it was to being so much worse. One wrong step, one open door, and I could have walked straight into something I would never escape. So, if you hear a sound in your house you don't expect, don't shrug it off. Lock the door, leave the lights on. And if you ever find an empty room that feels too quiet, remember this. Sometimes the empty places in our homes are full of people we never invited.